Greetings, everyone. Dumelang. Welcome to the politics of you and me. You are joined today by your host, Mpho Nyamathe, and I am someone who has completed their degree at the University of Johannesburg. And today I want to share such a full circle moment with you all. Having completed my degree in politics, international relations, and sociology at the University of Johannesburg. I graduated last year in 2024, and today I was invited to be a guest lecturer in preparation for a mock summit that was basically being prepared by the Department of Geography and Environmental Sciences at the University of Johannesburg. So this was really an exciting opportunity to really participate with students in the process of creating inclusive policies, particularly around environmental justice, particularly around the improvement and the actions that we need to make in order for our climate to stand a fighting chance in the crisis that we're in. It was such a wonderful engagement, and because I didn't also record the full thing, I wanted to really make it available to everyone here on this platform because this is a topic that is so dear to my heart. So with that, I invite you to the retelling of how I really executed this lecture, particularly with regards to this topic. So with that, I welcome you. We're going to be exploring how politics is ingrained in every facet of our society, but this time we're going to be looking at how the politics of mining, how the politics of our history as well affects the way we exist, live, and work. But particularly within the context of people living in mining communities, particularly in the context of workers. And with that, I end off by encouraging young people to really stay involved and to make sure that as future policymakers, they use their expertise to improve the lives of those around them. So thank you for joining us. Let's get started. So with regards to this topic, my intention is to really take an intersectional approach to environmental injustice. With that, I really want to show, and I'm really going to show, that environmental injustice is linked to the oppression of Black people. It is also really centered on the intersectional impact of gender and racial discrimination, right? Now, when we're looking at intersectionality, as I explained it last week, but I will do so again, as explained by Dr. Patricia Hill Collins, a wonderful sociologist in this type of thinking, Dr. Collins was really fascinated as a social scientist by Black women, particularly because they experienced a focal point of two powerful systems of oppression. This is race and gender, right? And with that, the social positioning of women, of Black women, especially in the time of oppression, encourages us to see, to look for, to acknowledge other spaces where systems of inequality come together, right? We talked about this within the context of gender inequality and gender-based violence and femicide last week. And so today, I encourage you to look for where other systems of inequality come together, particularly within the mining sector. Because if we trace back to our history, mining really came together in terms of, a means of electrification for the purpose of industry, not for the purpose of the Black majority who needed electricity in their far-flung rural areas, in their township areas that were experiencing limited service delivery, right? But also just intersecting systems of inequality with regards to racial discrimination that basically compels you to work in conditions that are unfavorable, that you cannot exactly contest, right? So with Patricia Hill Collins, we also talk about the matrix of domination, right? And They argue that the matrix of domination really explains the organization of power in a society, how there's intersecting systems of inequality that are often linked or that are often connected in terms of history or social factors, right? And within the matrix of domination, we can think of the matrix of domination as a theoretical approach and intersectionality as a theory, the theory of intersectionality. So within the matrix of domination, Collins then argues that there are 4 domains of power within this matrix of domination. We have structural, we have disciplinary, we have hegemonic, and interpersonal. And what I did in this lecture, in the same way as I did last week, I was really focused on explaining the structural aspect because I feel like it is more relevant also to the discussion that we're having at large, right? For example, with the structural domain, these are social structures such as the law, such as the government, such as the constitution, right? And these are things about our society that really, really control how we live, how we exist, and how we choose to show up, and the capacity in which we can show up, right? And I'd like to take you to an example of the voting rights of black miners. During apartheid, the people who were working as black miners in the most dangerous conditions, in the most unfair conditions, these were black people. So mining thrived at the exploitation of cheap black labor, right? And here, what Collins does with the structural domain, she really argues that the structural domain sets the organization of power in society. And as institutionalization works and as superstructures work, they're very slow to change. This means that people who are most affected, they are the last people to experience systemic change, even though they deserve it the most, right? And this is where I want to get us to start thinking about Marikana, right? Because under the Marikana massacre, which took place in 2012, this was basically like a strike for better living wages, right? And basically what mine workers were asking for, they were asking for Loman Platinum Mines to pay them adequately for the dangerous work that they were doing with regards to rock drilling, with regards to also the payment and all of the other things that they were, experiencing in their workplace. Now, Loman refused to negotiate. 34 people were killed under the instruction of Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the non-executive director at the time, right? And these strikes were really seen as a criminal issue instead of a labor dispute. Now, today, the people in Marikana, they are failing to experience basic service delivery, right? And even when we went to a workshop, right, during my time as a student at the University of Johannesburg, specifically for sociology as one of my majors, we were able to have an event where we talked to the widows of Marikana and get to understand how their living conditions are ever since they lost their breadwinners in the Marikana massacre. And they will tell you that when they call the police don't even show up, that it is a very dangerous place to walk around at night, right? And with that really just shows us that with regards to environmental injustice and the inequalities that we see that are rather institutionalized, it really hides racism and discrimination under the guise of efficiency. And this is where Collins also borrowed from Weber and Foucault, saying that, sometimes bureaucratic structures, they really control human behavior on the basis of routines, on the basis of rationalization, on the basis of repeated tasks, but also just that loss of autonomy, right? And that's something that we can really, really see here. Now, in the second part of my discussion, I really want to ask us, why do we have to care about environmental injustice in the coal mines? Well, because it is really put forward in Section 24 of our Constitution, right? Our Constitution, South Africa's Constitution, is the highest law of the land. It gives us purpose and direction as to where we wanted our South Africa to be after experiencing a very heavy time of oppression in 1994, where South Africa needs to go, but also where South Africa is, right? And this constitution is celebrated for being one of the best constitutions in the world, but we still have a long way to go as South Africans with regards to policy implementation, right? And this is where I want to bring forward the Cancel Coal campaign. With the Cancel Coal campaign, this was brought on forward by the African Climate Alliance, Vugani Environmental Movement as representatives of communities living in the Highveld Region, and the Center of Environmental Rights, right? And with that, the Cancel Coal campaign came through with the requirement that laws have to be consistent with the Constitution, with Section 24 of the Constitution, which gives us all the rights to a healthy environment that is safe and promotes the well-being of future generations, and an environment that promotes biodiversity and promotes the protection of our ecology and just preventing ecological degradation, right? So the problem here was that our laws were not necessarily consistent with Section 24 of the Constitution by suggesting the generation of 1,500 megawatts of coal-fired power to the national grid. By adding that to the national grid, this was also inconsistent with our NDCs to really decommission coal and to start moving into a just transition and clean energy that is better for everyone who is most affected, right? Because as we all know, mining affects water, it affects air, it affects soil, it also disrupts farming activities, which many lower working class or middle class citizens rely on in those rural areas, right? And a study conducted by Jacqueline Koch, who is a brilliant sociologist who's actually, looking into this as a research interest as well, shows that in terms of direct health impacts, we have about 2,000 deaths a year, 9,533 cases of chronic bronchitis in children aged 6 to 12, and 2,781 cases in adults in Mpumalanga, which is where most of the mining and coal-fired stations are housed, right? Even when we look at Aba, which is an informal settlement located near the Kendal station, water in that region is brought into that community very irregularly because the water is not safe to drink due to the contamination that comes from the mines. This is where we really see the impact of acid mine drainage and how mining can really affect access to water in already water scarce areas, right? And then the next part of the conversation really also implored our young policymakers to consider the rights of mine workers. Because when we're looking at the National Union of Metal Workers, NUMSA, they believe that the energy sector has to have social ownership. The main area of contention here is the privatization of renewable energy. Now, I mentioned this in the last episode, which was, I think, episode 2, the practice of environmental injustice in South Africa's mines, that during the time where Hadrina was experiencing partial closure, Hadrina is one of 5 Eskom's coal-fired stations. They were partially closing it, and as a result, 2,300 workers lost their jobs. They were employed by labor brokers, and as a result, Eskom took no responsibility whatsoever for those people who lost their jobs. This is also where we see that there is not only an intersectional inequality, but also systemic inequalities. Miners did not have a leg to stand on in the past during apartheid. They didn't have a leg to stand on during Marikana. And now they also don't have a leg to stand on in the face of the just transition, which is not really just for them, their expertise and the career that they've devoted their livelihoods towards, right? And when we're looking at it intersectionally, we can even make the argument that from a long time, Black people were really told where to live in terms of the Group Areas Act, the Housing Act. That promoted spatial divides where polluting industries were strategically located in Black neighborhoods, right? So looking at that form of racial discrimination, as well as the discrimination to specifically implore Black people who did not have voting rights at that time to do such dangerous work, right? That's where we really see that they're intersecting forms of oppression. We can make that argument in terms of race, in terms of class, and in terms of just the social backgrounds that really determines the kind of life that you can live, the kind of rights that you can have ownership to, and the kind of rights that are afforded to the future generations that come after you. This speaks to the structural domain that Collins was arguing to say that things like this are slow to change. Such structural changes are very, they come very slow, and those who are affected the most experience that systemic change the least and at the later stage, right? And with that, I also want to take us to the next part of our conversation. And this was specifically looking at compliance, right? And when we can consider, the conversation on compliance, just like we said in the beginning of the discussion, everyone has a right to a healthy environment as per Section 24 of the Constitution, which is specifically in the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2 of the Constitution, right? But outside of that, there's also a right to just administrative action. More specifically, before mining can even take place, mining companies must get permission from the government. But before that, before government permission, before the government grants that permission, they needs to assess the environment. Mining company needs to assess the environment. The mining company needs to learn about the community, and they need to consult with them. Now, when we're looking at the Thabametsi Power Company, they were granted authorization by the chief director to build power stations in Lapalele, which is already a water-scarce area. At first, they refused, or were rather reluctant, to conduct an assessment that would show the potential damage of this mining project on the communities. But eventually, when they finally did do a climate change impact assessment, it was clear that the mining projects could actually worsen the power storage, right? And, or rather the power station, the plans to build the power station, they could ultimately worsen the power storage, and also just, the generation of water already being a concern in that community as well, right? And from there, the decision was that any development really should consider the community impacts. And then also, when we're looking at the Air Quality Act, the Mpumalanga Highveld Region was declared as a priority area under Chapter 4, Section 18, Subsection 1. And with that, this basically means that ambient air quality is being exceeded in that region, and there needs to be air quality management to rectify the situation. There needs to be an air quality control plan. And unfortunately, with regards to this, there were delays in implementation of an air quality control plan for areas that have really bad air quality. And this is how the Deadly Air case came about, led by the Center of Environmental Rights in 2019, right? And with that, the Deadly Air case acknowledged that low-income people are having difficulties getting their voices heard. There's that racial discrimination coming through. There's that classist discrimination coming through. And there's also just that sense of your background, where you live, speaking for the kinds of rights that you are entitled to. That is an intersectional issue, but also that is a severe, gross miscarriage of injustice, particularly for people who have been waiting and hoping for systemic change after a time of oppression, after apartheid, only to have similar circumstances in which they had then in terms of their labor rights. And with regards to the deadly air case, I then also provided an update to say that with regards to the Highveld Air Quality Management Plan, the minister actually appealed the deadly air case, saying that as the Minister of Environmental Affairs, which is actually now the Minister of the Department of Forestries, Fisheries and the Environment, right? So as the minister, he believed that he has the duty, the mandate to publish and action a lot of the mandates that are going out with regards to electricity, or rather the generation of coal, additional generation of coal, and with regards to all of these measures that would affect communities, right? But that appeal was dismissed on the basis as well of Section 24, and ensuring that no one is left behind in the creation of energy and the creation of natural capital, right? And as a way forward, it's really important as change makers, as young leaders, that we involve our communities. You know, during the deadly air case, Vugani environmental movement specifically said that, you know, their area where they live has become a sacrifice zone where there are human rights violations being conducted on a daily as a result of polluted air and as a result of the government also dragging their feet where their feet shouldn't be dragged, right? With that, it's also important for us as change makers to mobilize. You're not the only person who cares about these issues, right? And with that, you'll find many young people that you can pool your brain power with, your resources with, to make an impact, to raise your voices about the issues that you see about within your country, the changes that have still yet to come to those who are most affected, right? And with that, especially because I was talking to a class of young people who are in academia, who are doing research, who have academic expertise with regards to environmental sciences, I really encourage them to match their advocacy with their academia, because now more than ever, we need leaders who actually know what they are talking about. Leaders who use research-based, science-based approaches in order to generate systemic change and in order to service their communities as per their constitutional mandate, right? And with that, I also encouraged young people to get involved in the creation of youth statements, to be educated, to partner up with impactful organizations such as the African Climate Alliance, which is a youth-led grassroots movement-based organization that really demands systemic change, intersectional systemic change, whether it's within the context of spatial divides, whether it's in the context of, you know, climate justice, but in its entirety, right? Access to water, access to a safe environment where it's not overly polluted, you know, all of the aspects of environmental injustice that you would define within your living experiences. And I think they're really great for the work that they do, and I really encourage young people to really join the movement and to really be part of the systemic change that they're doing there. They led the Cancel Call campaign as, you know, one of the, you know, primary civil society organizations, and I think it's really a great place for young people to see policy in action, to see diplomacy in action, to see how the contestation of such issues such as environmental injustice works in a judiciary space within our South African context, right? And with that, I also asked that no one gets left behind, you know, especially in the creation of policies. You know, these are young people at a mock summit representing different countries, thinking about how they would go about policies that are about climate. And with that, I really encouraged them, you know, that no matter what they do, they never leave anyone behind, because the people who deserve the most change are the ones that are left behind, and who are considered the least, right? And this was such a pleasure, because getting to connect with the space in which I grew in and getting to inspire young people to be change makers, and to be responsible for the future, to be responsible for the society in which they are living. This was really a great opportunity to expand on my knowledge, to have bold conversations about the injustice that's happening within the mining sector, and also present real solutions as to how young people can get involved. I even spoke about how, as part of the young people who put forward a youth statement for the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And when you are that involved, it even becomes a point where you hear the president talking about the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan at the State of the Nation address, knowing full well that you were part of the young people who contributed to that. It is time, now more than ever, to increase the voice of young people and to make sure that they have a space in policy making. They have a space in decisions that are made about them. In the words of Winifred Mandela, nothing about us without us. So with that, I want to thank you for joining for yet another exciting episode of the Politics of You and Me. You are joined by your host, Mpho Nyamathe. Such a pleasure always interacting with you guys, and I hope that we can interact some more when I see you next for our next episode. We're almost wrapping up. We're almost coming to the end of our first season. I want to thank you for sticking it through with me, for growing with me, and our conversations are going to get much more impactful, just showing how so many aspects of how this country is governed affects our daily lives. So with that, I'm signing out. Thank you so much for tuning in. Love and light, signing out.